So today we're going to see that if I take a competitive equilibrium, which is our another ideal, and if we try to involve that structure within the framework of general equilibrium, then what do we have? Or to say, we have talked about efficiency reached through market trade between two consumers, and we want to see whether such a trade can generate something as ideal as competitive equilibrium. Okay, so first we are going to have uh, a view somewhat in detail about how actually competitive equilibrium is attained. Okay, so we call that auctioneer view. We call that auctioneer view. As you know that in reaching the equilibrium of a competitive market, unlike monopoly or oligopoly, we do not have identifiable individuals who actually brings in the equilibrium. So we have an auctioneer view where we imagine an auctioneer who is carrying out an auction. Okay, and that's why in advanced game theory we will find auction theory, and it is there in quite details, but that auction is literally the kind of auctions that you watched in movies or series. But here we are also talking about an auction which is obviously of the same structure. That is, on one side you have got one consumer, okay, and on the other side there is another consumer. So here is our two consumer. Okay, you can increase or extend this setup to n consumers, but if you extend it, then it will be more complex to understand. But the basic setup, basic skeleton remains the same. So what is the idea? So here we have one consumer and the other. Okay, so they are coming in with their endowments. So let us talk in terms of GE. Think of this is a two-person barter where there is an auctioneer who controls it. Okay, you can think of that also. So these two guys, they are coming with their own endowments, and they are facing each other with the prospect. So what is the prospect of buying and selling? Okay, now instead of standard trading that we saw in Pareto efficiency earlier, here something different is happening. See, the auctioneer is, what is his job? He is announcing price. So auctioneer is announcing rather prices. Okay, so we are having obviously a simple setup of two goods. So the auctioneer is coming and announcing prices, and with each and every announced price, so let's say the auctioneer first announced some price, something like P1 not and P2 not, where 1 and 2 are the goods. Okay, and given that price, each of the consumers are kind of saying how much they wish to buy and sell for each good. Okay, so let's say they announce P1 not, and let's say consumer 1 is trying to sell P1 good 1. Okay, so consumer 1 will say how much good 1 to sell at price P1 not, and consumer 2 will say how much good 1 to buy at price P1 not. And if this demand and supply for good 1, if equate, well, then we have a deal. And if it does not, then we do not have a deal. And what happens when you do not have a deal? Then the auctioneer will go and announce some other price or price set or some other prices. Now, how will the auctioneer get the guidance? For example, let's say the auctioneer announces P1 not and P2 not, and sees that for none of the goods, demand and supply, equate. So now the auctioneer's job is to announce another set of price, let's say some P11 and P12. So yes, P12. So now how will you get the guidance so as to which one will be the, whether the prices will be higher or not? So that guidance will come from the nature of excess demand that the auctioneer will observe for each good. So for example, if the auctioneer observe excess demand for good 1, then the next price for good 1 will be a bit higher. Or if the auctioneer observes excess supply for good 2, then the next price of good 2 will be a bit lower. So that will follow the kind of rules that we have learned in demand and supply. And it will go on like this. And when will it end? So the end of auction is happening when we have a price list. Okay, so we have something of a P1 bar and P2 bar at which demand equals supply for each good. Okay, so what is the end of an auction? An end of an auction occurs when we have got some prices or price vector, okay, if you want a more mathematical word, then such that demand and supply equals for each good. So that's the auctioneer job. Now, given that setup in mind, so that is verbally describing or a verbal description of achieving a competitive equilibrium in the presence of an auctioneer. Now, if I am going to achieve a competitive equilibrium through market trade, then I have to ensure that the exchange of goods at the observed prices, that has to be voluntary. Okay, like we studied in Pareto efficiency structure, or in while trading within the Edgeworth box, that whatever trade occurs, that occurs voluntarily. Okay, no one is forcing them. It's just that if you are being better off at no cost of mine, then I don't have any wish to block your prospect of being better off. Okay, all right, so we are not dealing with a kind of population where people think the opposite. Okay. Anyways, so to that extent, they are quite good individuals. Anyways, so now, given this verbal description, if I want to achieve this kind of a thing in a market trade, okay, what do I need? Okay, now first of all, I said earlier also that including the competitive structure, it has primarily one objective, and the objective is to obtain market prices of the goods being traded. So while inclusion of including competitive equilibrium, what goes in our head is basically this: we want something like this, all right, at equilibrium, at our Pareto efficiency point. Now keeping that in mind, we are now going to look at what are the requirements or conditions that such an equilibrium needs to satisfy. Okay, so first of all, obviously, that is quite trivial. First of all is prices are same for both. So now that may appear quite trivial, but they are same only at equilibrium. Okay, so the reason the auctioneer is going for revisiting the prices is just that at the price, the price at which some consumer is willing to buy some units, those are not the units the other consumer is willing to sell. Okay, so that's why in equilibrium we need demand and supply to be equal. Now that is true. Second is, Now, this is something that we have covered partly when you have done uh, consumer behavior problems with endowments. Okay. So what is that? Prices must satisfy both final and initial allocations. Right? It has to be true, because otherwise it is not possible to show that utility has been maximized, right? So if the budget has changed from the initial to final, then the basic one of the very important assumption of utility maximization is not being fulfilled, and that assumption says that you can't save any money. Okay, all right. So given that idea, what does it say? It says basically that P1 XA1 bar, so this is the final allocation, right? Okay, of good 1 and 2 for individual A, that must equate or equal with the endowment with which individual A is coming, and that is also true for individual B. So we have the similar equation with A replaced by B. Now, for consumers optimization or utility maximization, we need only the income and not really these details. But if we want to ask how the demand and supply changed, something that you have learned as net demand and gross demand, or net supply and gross supply, if you're asking that kind of question, then we need this kind of an elaboration, but otherwise it's good enough. Okay, now as I said that we will be continuously assuming that you know standard utility maximization, profit maximization, and all other such optimization problems. You see, in consumers optimization problem, the equilibrium condition says that the MRS between two goods must equal the price ratio. Right? So this is our equilibrium condition that directly comes from consumer behavior. Now, it has to be true for A, and also it has to be true for B. Again, Pareto efficiency tells us that at optimal point, these two persons MRS must be equal. That ensures efficiency. So, that said, both of them must be equal to the relative price. Right? Okay. Now, before going further, we are going to make a claim. And the claim goes like this. Okay, the claim goes like this. You can't find P1 and P2 separately. That is something that you cannot do. Okay, so you cannot find P1 and P2 separately. And why is that? That is very simple to show. Let's say I have an equilibrium of P1 bar and P2 bar. And let's define this. Okay. All right, with obviously K positive, because otherwise it will not have any meaning. Now, these are the constraints that are need to be satisfied. So if I include P1 hat and P2 hat, okay, taking them as the equilibrium prices, then I will rewrite them just by doing this. Right? So at equilibrium, the prices must satisfy the income and expenditure, right? Like usual consumers problem. Now, if I transfer them using this definition, then I will have K into P1 bar, and here also K into, okay, so that's we have, so K into P2 bar, right? And here I will have K P1 bar K into P2 bar. So what it essentially shows is that now K being non-zero, I can cancel out, right? And my equilibrium condition becomes the original one. So P1 bar X1 A bar, P2 bar XA2 bar, XA bar 2 or whatever, equating the expenditure amount, all right? So that's how we can easily show that you can keep on multiplying the equilibrium prices by some K, and it will keep on giving you the same equilibrium, okay? And if that is true, then you cannot find P1 and P2 uniquely, okay? All you will be able to find, so our solution, it will contain this, okay? What you call is relative price ratio or relative price, so to say. Okay, we'll study the, so to say, the definition of Walrasian equilibrium or comparative equilibrium in Walrasian setup, and we'll see, we'll come back to this again, and we'll see why only relative price is the only thing that we are going to get, and how that is good enough. There is no problem with that, okay? Because you can always put P2 equal to 1 and find P1 or the other way. All right. So what we learn from all of this is basically that absolute prices in a Walrasian equilibrium doesn't really matter. All matters is the relative price, right? And from that relative price, if you wish, you can make some price, one of them equal to unity, and express the other one quite conveniently. Okay, so now we are going to look at the diagram inside the Edgeworth box, where we'll see how we can bring in the comparative equilibrium in our Pareto efficiency setup. Okay. Okay, so this is how the diagram looks like. So obviously E is our initial endowment point, okay, and WB2 and 1 are the initial endowments for B, whose origin is here, and WA1 bar and A2 bar, these are the initial endowments of A, whose origin is here. So you start from the E, and we have drawn these two indifference curves, right? And this is C, our final Pareto efficient equilibrium, the kind of equilibrium that we have seen earlier. Now, as I said, that the relative price, it is same for both, right? It's not the case that each of them are looking at two different price sets. No. So the ICs are tangent at the point C, right? So at C, we have our familiar condition, that is MRS A equal to MRS B. And just now we saw that it has to be equal to P1 by P2. So this is our price line going through the common point at which these two ICs are tangent. Also, it has to satisfy the budget line. So P1 x1 bar plus P2 xa2 bar equal to MA. Right? So that's why it is connecting both the C, that is the equilibrium point, and E, that is the initial endowment, right? And the gap between these two and these two and these other two, right? They will give us the net demand and supply. So prices has to be such that the budget line must be tangent to this common tangential, this common point, right? Prices have to be such that the budget line goes both through C and E. And lastly, prices have to be such that these gaps, these demand and supply gaps, they are satisfied. Okay, so I'll say it again, 3 points. Number one is that this condition has to be satisfied, so price line goes to the common tangential point. Number two is this condition has to be satisfied, right? That the budget line goes through, the price line goes both through C and E. And number three is that this trade, okay, this trade by showing by this gap, they have to be supported by the price. Okay, unless these three conditions are satisfied simultaneously, we have a problem, or do not have an equilibrium. Okay. So given this setup, now we can theorize the things a bit, and now we can state the equilibrium, the definition of the equilibrium in detail. Okay. Okay, so the three conditions that you have just stated, they are, I mean, at least one of them, which tells us demand must equal to supply. Okay, that is one of the condition to have the competitive equilibrium in the first place. The second, which is quite trivial, but in as I said, awkward problems where a Leontief is probably contrasted with a lexicographic one, that kind of a problem. So in difficult problems, it's very hard to actually maintain the second conditions, which is quite trivial, which says all prices are non-negative. Okay, so saying that, what it essentially also says that at equilibrium you can have some prices, some goods for free. Okay, all right. Okay. So now we are going to state the Walrasian equilibrium. Okay. All right. So I'm going to erase this diagram. So we are going to formally write whatever we talked about at length. So Walrasian or competitive equilibrium, right? That's what our objective is. So in the pure exchange economy, so the kind what we are dealing with, pure exchange, okay, but obviously we are dealing it in consumption. You will have it in production and in mix also. So what is our equilibrium? What are the components at P1 bar, comma P2 bar? So they are equilibrium prices, and XA1 bar, comma XA2 bar, XB1 bar, XB2 bar. What are the things that we need? Okay, the condition number one. So condition number one is, in the pure exchange economy, at this equilibrium with prices and 4 resulting allocations or final allocations, What are the things that we want? Number one is quantities. So that's what we here have. Quantities maximize utility. Okay. So you cannot have values of x which do not maximize agent's utility. And number two, which is very simple, it says demand equal to supply for each good. Now that has to happen, right? Otherwise, the prices that we would have got, they will carry no meaning at all, right? Now, in context of that, the next, rather, next we'll proceed to excess demand. Okay, excess demand functions, and we'll do it for each good. We'll do it for each good and also for aggregate. Okay, so we'll do for each good and also we'll do for aggregate, and thereby we will learn some of the important theoretical aspects of this equilibrium, like Walras law, aggregate excess demand function, and what are the things that we have to maintain. And along with that, we will learn another way of looking at the relative price, and we'll see, given the excess demand function, why it is not really possible to have two separate prices, but one relative price ratio for two goods, and why that is quite good enough. Okay.